Okay, here we go. We are live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another lecture, another live webinar, so to say. Of course, it won't be for everyone live. Some of you are going to look at this after we finish. You will get the recording, or I will definitely put it on my YouTube channel so everyone can have an access to it. Welcome. I'm really happy to give another English lecture, so to say. Last time it was really nice when we talked about intuition, and I thought a topic that really goes nicely right afterwards is very universal. It's topic about the universal principles of feminine and masculine energy, and or like it's a general talk about the principles of duality. Duality is like a governing law in our universe and in our daily life. So I will going to talk about and give you like a macrocosmic perspective around these energies. Where do they come from? And then we will slowly go from macro to micro, right, to our daily lives. And I will give my best to explain you how these energies, these very universal and cosmic energies, influence our daily lives. Because feminine and masculine energy are energies that we have within us, right? They are everywhere outside of us and also within us. And they're very strong, and they of course influence our behavior, our thoughts, our emotions, our relationships, the way how we treat each other, the way how we treat nature, and all of that. So I hope you will get like a bigger and like a smaller picture about these energies, because they are so important. And if we can give our best to understand them, really understand them, and understand how they work within us, we have a really good chance in trying to balance them, to keep them in this so-called dynamic balance. Because when we have these energies very well balanced and integrated within us, our life becomes much more healthier, much more balanced, more holistic, and everything seems to come to a very and very integrated nature, which means like we can walk the talk, right? We can apply this knowledge, these informations into our daily lives, and in some way our life then becomes easier simply because we can understand better what's happening in our life. You know, we don't feel so lost and at mercy of life and destiny, or however you want to call it. We have more power then. I won't say the word control, but power. We have more power over our lives. Okay, so I will oftentimes I will have a look on my writings, on my notices. Simply because I like to follow a certain thread of thought so that I don't get lost too much in a sideways. This lecture is very much inspired by a very wonderful teacher that I follow. Her name is Gigi Young. So I want to give her credentials for this, because she's someone who very nicely integrates knowledges from all kinds of traditions and teachings and presents it into one very integrative form. So I was very much inspired by it, and I would like to give my take on this topic. Okay, so let's dive in. When I said, when I announced this topic, which was the talk about around these universal principles, I said that this is going to be a story, an archetypal story, right? So when we talk about archetypes, the way how you can understand archetypes is it's basically an impulse which at some point gets personified. This is how I understand. The word archetype is very common in the daily language, but it also stems from a very famous psychoanalyst and I would say like a spiritual seeker, Carl Jung. He talked a lot about archetypes and of archetypal forces that literally exist in our collective subconscious, and that on a certain level they influence us. So there are a bunch of archetypes, and they all get to be, as we, live our daily lives, we see more kinds of, like, there are plenty of archetypes. Carl Jung presented 12, but there are even more. But as we go more to the macrocosmical picture, we have basically two forces, or like one force that has two fragments of it, and one impulse that basically fragments into two. And this is the cosmic impulse, basically the cosmic impulse for creation. As you know, duality is a governing force in our lives and in our universe. So we have dark and we have light, right? We have the feminine and the masculine. We have the good and the evil. So those are all different kinds of phrases that describe one thing, which is the law of duality, right? So duality is a creative force, and because we have duality, we have this creative force within everything, right? Even if we look on a very, very small scale, like the atom itself has the positive and the negative, right, within it. It's like the proton and the electron. So when you look at that level and apply it to the, macrocosmical picture, you have everywhere the light and dark, the positive, the negative, the feminine, the masculine. So I find that very, very important and profound, because if that is something that governs the whole universe, well, then it governs also my life, right? So and everyone's lives. So therefore, it's really important that we understand it on a bit deeper level. In many different traditions, you will have this teachings, right? That basically talk about the same. You have in the Eastern teachers the yin and yang, right? We have in Indian teachings Shiva and Shakti, right? Those are also the forms of the phrase for basically explaining the same, the masculine and feminine energy. Shiva is masculine, Shakti would be the feminine energy, and like the topic that I call today, masculine and feminine, this is like something that is very well established within our Western culture, so to say. So on the cosmical level, when we talk about macrocosmical picture, you can look at from many perspectives, right? How the universe started with its existence. The scientists would call it the Big Bang, or there used to be the singular spot, right? This unified field, the unity, if you would use the more like spiritual language. So I will try to use a lot of terms that come from psychology, from spirituality, a little bit from science, the parts that science can explain. Of course, science is wonderful and explains the natural laws, right? The laws that govern our nature, our planet, the material world. And then we have the non-physical stuff, right? That cannot be explained by science, but we try to explain it through philosophy, psychology, spirituality, and so on. So I like to use all those approaches in order to understand better one thing, right? The more perspectives we have around one phenomena, the more objectively we can understand them, and the more holistically we can understand it, basically. So I like to really have as many perspectives as possible. That's why I like also metaphysics, spirituality, but also science, psychology, and all of that stuff. So, like I said, we used to have this singular point, right? The unity, the place where everything started, where we had unified consciousness, or this unified field, the singular point from which everything started, with this expansion, with the Big Bang, right? The moment when the Big Bang happened, we had this, we can call it fragmentation, right? From the unified field, everything fragmented into many different forms in our cosmos. We have a lot of forms. This is something that is very interesting, how the universe is very creative and creates a lot of forms on material and non-material planes, so to say. In a material sense, we have a lot of planets, right? And all kinds of phenomena in our universe. We also have a lot of planes of existence as well, a lot of dimensions. This is also where physics now, especially quantum physics, catched up and understood that there are many dimensions. There is not only this physical dimension that we're in, but universe is basically a multiverse. Oftentimes you will see this name multiverse, like a lot of dimensions that basically exist within one cosmos. They all overlap each other. So as you can see, like this Big Bang, when it happened, it started this great fragmentation. A lot of streams started to came out. You can also see it as like a light that comes and goes through prism and has like 7 different rays, right, of colors. That's fragmentation, right? And each fragment has its own quality, its own perspective, right? So some people say that the whole point of universe and this whole fragmentation and Big Bang that happened is basically so that universe can understand itself better through these different perspectives that exist, right? So you see that we have a lot of different living forces on our planet. We have stones, we have plants, we have like mineral kingdom, animal kingdom, plant kingdom. They all have life energy within them. They all give different perspectives. And of course, humanity as well, as part of the planet, also offers a unique perspective on this universe, on this form of existence, right? So through this fragmentation, basically the basic impulse that came is this impulse of like duality, right? The feminine and the masculine energy. They are the creative forces within everything. So as long as we have balanced, or like we have feminine and masculine energy, that thing can manifest itself and exist, right? The moment we are out of balance, where there's no masculine or no feminine energy, that thing ceases to exist. Like it cannot exist. We need both, right? It is the only matter of the balance. Like at some points we have more masculine, at some points we have more feminine energy, and so on and so on. So the reason why, like I said, we have a lot of fragmentation, right, and a lot of different impulses and archetypes that exist, is so that we can understand better, so we can understand each other better, and in general our law, our like the laws of this universe, so to say. I speak now very much into this macrocosmical vocabulary, so I hope you can place it somewhere within you. You can always, when I give this kind of lectures and topics like this, I always say filter it through your heart, right? Open your heart and listen more with your heart rather than with your mind, because mind is very limited to our material plane. So open your heart and filter through and see what resonates with you and what not. So yeah, like I said, they are, so the basic impulse that comes from universe is this impulse of feminine and masculine energy, because it's creative, it creates life. And when it goes like through this like different planes of existence, right? The place where we came from is non-physical. I think that's obvious for everyone. And that's why science cannot actually explain it, because it's not physical, right? Where do we actually come from? We definitely come from a non-physical part of this universe. And this non-physical existence has many planes, many dimensions. So when a certain impulse comes from this singular point, or from the God, from the source, however you want to call it, it tends to, when it goes through these layers of dimensions, it tends to become more fragmented, and it materializes itself. It becomes more concrete, right? So when it comes like here on the earth, right, or on this material plane level, it can take a form, a certain personified form. So before earth and the material 3D plane, which is the most dense, right, we have this so-called astral plane. This astral plane is a plane basically where we, or dimension, or whatever level you want to talk about, it's a place where we go when we sleep. more or less. This is the most simple explanation that I can give, although it's very, very much more complex than this. Astral plane is a very special topic, but in order to keep this short, I will just I would like to connect this topic of fragmentation and how fragmentation looks on astral plane with something that you know already, and that is like our dream state. So this is where we go, like our consciousness goes, focuses on the astral plane when we sleep. On this plane, it is also something that Carl Jung called the subconscious or the collective subconscious. So like the subconscious of the whole humanity. And on this plane, we have these impulses, these archetypal forces that take a certain form. And Carl Jung called them thought forms, right? So that's why, like when you're dreaming, you have all kinds of images and whatnot, because those are like your thought forms. And not only yours, the whole collective, like the whole humanity has this collective subconscious, which is filled up with different types of thought forms. And thought forms are basically just, our thoughts that are projected on this astral plane. This is how I understand it. And on that plane, the feminine and the masculine archetype, basically it can fragment itself in many archetypes. Carl Jung talked about 12 archetypes. So you have the archetype of warrior, of sage, of a wise person, of magician, and so on. Mother archetype, right? Now we can talk about way more than 12. There are many, many archetypes, but that's basically like this personified impulse. On the astral plane, these impulses tend to get personified, like in the form of take a form of a person. This is why mythology itself is also based on archetypes, on personified archetypes, right? The personified impulses. You have the Zeus, the Aphrodite, the Had, and so on. So or Hades, how they call it. So all kinds of thought forms that are personified, and they take this form of like persona, so to say, just because we can then understand them better. When the things are very abstract to us, we cannot understand them. So usually human beings learn the best when the concepts, ideas, or thought forms are personified, have a person that represents a certain archetype. For example, an archetype of a teacher, or like I said, warrior, or sage, or whatever. Like there are many, 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 many archetypes. And these archetypes find themselves in the subconscious plane, like on our individual subconscious and especially on the collective subconscious. And they have a huge influence on us, right? Especially depending on era that we find ourselves as a humanity, like during the evolution, we see that the different archetypes have more influence, and then in a different phase of evolution, it has a little bit of less of an influence. For example, the matriarchy, right, that was very dominant at the beginning of human evolution. This feminine impulse was very strong, and this archetype of mother was very strong in our subconscious, and then it materialized itself on the physical level as matriarchy, right? We had a very long matriarchy, a period of time on Earth. And then after a while, it usually switches up, and then we enter in an era that is way more masculine, right? That we have a very strong masculine impulse. And each of these impulses also within themselves have the light and the dark, right? The shadow aspect and the light aspect. This is just because, like I said, duality governs everything in this universe. So even within these impulses, we have the higher version of feminine energy and the lower version of feminine energy. The same way is for masculine. So this is why I give you this concept, so that you can try to see how these archetypes have tremendous influence on us, and not only that they run our lives as well, but also the huge collective, right? The whole humanity. So when I talked about this high and low version of masculine and feminine energy, you can try to understand where we are right now within the evolution. I will talk about it more now in the later minutes. But it's just important to understand, so that we have this cosmic impulse, that the impulse of creation, which is based on duality. When it goes through different planes of existence, so to say, it tends to fragment itself even more and to get more concrete form, like becomes concretized, or more concrete, more solid in a way. On the astral plane, which is the plane above ours, where we go to sleep, or where our subconscious is, it takes the form of archetypes, of this personified impulse that can be seen in many different forms, like I said, the warrior, the teacher, the magician, and all of that. And then on this physical level, it tends to then materialize itself, right? So that it basically, out of these energies that like bring certain impulse, so that we do something out of it, right? So it's not only that we have certain thoughts, sorry, not only that we have certain thoughts that are influenced by these energies, but we also we act upon these energies and we create something. So if you would look on the collective picture, you would see these phases of our evolution where certain energies were more dominant or more influential on us, and then less, and how they switch. And at some point, it is expected that we can integrate all of these energies and keep them in balance. So yeah, on the astral plane we have these thought forms, right? This is like the basically how the astral plane looks like. The thought form is basically can take a form of image, right? It can personify itself, so that we can understand it better. Things are personified so that we can understand it. Like I said, important to know in which phase of evolution are we currently, and I will talk about it more. And yes, the beginning of humanity is definitely associated with more feminine energy, which makes sense, right? The motherly energy is there. Also, you can also see this macro picture on a micro level as a baby, right, that is born, and at the beginning of its life, it is definitely more influenced by the mother's energy, right? The father's energy is also there, but it becomes more and more influential and important as a child grows up and becomes more independent, right? We will talk now more about this very specific characteristics of both of these energies, but for now, you can also have a look on our lives, right? And like I said, at the beginning of humanity, or at the beginning of baby's life, there is very strong motherly energy, right? The motherly energy that created basically this human life, and then it has a huge influence at the beginning, and then afterwards comes the masculine impulse. Okay. So I will just have a little bit of water and then we can proceed. So the way how also masculine and feminine energies are represented, you can also take the astrology, for example, and use the Venus, right? Venus is a planet for this personification of feminine principle, of feminine energy, and Mars for explaining and personifying the masculine energy. So this is also something that you can hear quite often as an example of it. So I will now talk about this, the feminine energy, right? The feminine principle, you can also call it, the archetype, and how it, what kinds of characteristics it has, right, in our lives, and how you can recognize it within you and also outside of you, so you can understand it better. Okay, so the feminine principle, basically, it represents, as Gigi Young said, this upward pulling force. So basically the energy goes up. It becomes something that is related to inspiration, bringing the light bringer. For example, the Prometheus, this is the mythology, from mythology, the god one of the gods, Prometheus, is the light bearer. So that's also a form of expressing the feminine energy. So it brings light, it brings this higher energy, so to say, from the cosmos, you can also say it like that. It brings new information, new energy, so basically brings something new, a new change, so to say. It can, the feminine energy can bridge us to the future. It is also very much connected to spirit, to spirituality, right? So it's very like upward pulling force, so to say. So it's like earth connected to heaven, spirit, non-physical, metaphysical, and all of that. So the people who are very into spirituality have a lot of also feminine energy within them. Also, it makes concepts that are external into internal, right? So you would observe something outside, and then you would bring it within you and understand how it runs within you, right? With feminine energy, we understand this higher principles, right? Of some everyday things, right? We see in everyday things, in the mundane, so to say, we can find the beauty. This is also something very, very like core and central around feminine energy. It is very much, of course, beauty oriented because it can find beauty within everything, within the mundane, within the normal earthly life, the everyday life, the rituals, the habits, all of that. It can find really the beauty in it, as simple as it can be, right? It can also understand the reasons why something is done, like the higher reason behind something, and how things are interconnected with each other, right? It's very creative, full of inspiration, and it brings this spiritual fire, right? But like in order to inspire us to do something in our daily lives, right? It can really bridge nicely the spiritual side with the everyday material earthly side of life, right? It is very much heart-centered, and it's definitely something that reminds us that we are more than just this physical body, right? It reminds us of the cosmos, of non-physical places where we used to be before we came here. So it has this, like I said, it has this upward energy. Some of the, like I already gave you one example, Prometheus in mythology, it's also one famous archetype for like a light bearer, right? This is a very feminine concept, although he is masculine, but you have to understand that each one of us has these energies, right? Men and women have both feminine and masculine energies, and it's important that we understand both aspects. So no matter whether you are man or woman listening to this, these energies are within you. So, and you act out of them, right? So that's why it's important that we both understand this. I will give you a few examples that are very close to me, as like the personified. So we talked about the personification on the subconscious astral level, such as mythological god, right? And then sometimes it happens that a certain person or like a human comes to an earth, I like to say it incarnates and personifies a certain impulse. This is very rare, it doesn't happen so often, but there are points in our history where a certain impulse would be, or an archetype would be personified in a human form. So when we talk about like feminine energy, a very prominent example, doesn't matter whether you're Christian or not, but Mother Mary would be a very strong example of this archetype of a mother, right? Which was personified and showed in the highest light, right? The highest form of that archetype was personified and represented by Mother Mary, so that we can understand it better and connect to it and find it within us, right? Another example would be Mary Magdalene as well. Also like a very very, very strong example of a different type of, like also feminine energy, but a different archetype, more connected to this red feminine energy, so to say. So we have that. And like I said, it's not so common to have a human which represents the whole archetype, because this is very rare. It is also not common for humans to embody a certain impulse and archetype in its entirety. It's very hard to do this. But for these two examples are something that I know, or like whether she was alive or not, but also from the Egyptian culture, you can say the goddess Isis was also very much representation of a human representation of feminine energy. So these are just all examples so that you can see that we have this personifications on physical level, also on the astral level in form of archetypes, right, that are very, like, they're more general, right? And the more it goes down to the density, it becomes more concrete, and sometimes it takes a human form as well. On the other side, so we talked about a little bit about this, the light side, right, of the feminine. The dark side of the feminine would be basically running away from the physical reality, right? Because the feminine energy has this pull towards higher worlds and spirit and all of that. At some point, if it's not balanced enough, it wants to run away from the physical reality. It wants to avoid the responsibility for the life on Earth, right? Everything that is material becomes very much irrelevant, very, very irrelevant. Also, these concepts are connected to, it's something that is called Luciferianism, but you can, if you're interested in that, you can type in and see what the archetype of Lucifer represents. But basically it just wants to bypass the life on Earth. It just wants to transcend, to dissolve, to run away from responsibility. The concept of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, that kind of thing, just not taking care about anything. Usually the people who have very fallen feminine energy would get into certain kinds of addictions, all in the form of avoiding what's happening in reality right now, because it's too painful. It doesn't have enough of masculine energy to balance it out, right? You can also see within the spirituality how feminine and masculine impulse is very much divided through the East and West. The Eastern teachings, the Buddhism, for example, they are all about transcendence, right? To how to transcend this material plane. It has beautiful teachings within the self, but if it goes too far, right, the dark side of it would be basically becoming very passive, very, very ignorant of what's happening in your daily life on Earth, basically not seeing the beauty in the life on Earth, but just always trying to escape, right? The escapism, the bypassing, that's basically the fallen version of feminine energy. So also too much of this kind of dark feminine energy basically destroys any kinds of morals and ethics, because everything is then relative, right? That's like the form of very dark hedonism, right? Where you just use all kinds of things to escape, to sedate yourself, to run away from the pain, so to say, from your responsibility. This is why oftentimes also spirituality nowadays, it can become a tool to basically just escape, right? This is it's called very, very often found within spiritual circles, the so-called spiritual bypassing, that you use this concepts, metaphysical, because you know now that there is something more than the earth and that you are more than your body, that you slowly start to identify more with the non-physical than with your physical body. These people tend to be very much ungrounded, right? They are not, they don't have a very strong structure or discipline or, routines. This is like when it's very, very extreme. These examples are not so often, but they are there, you know, they do exist. So I give you also these extreme examples just so that you can contrast and see. It doesn't mean that you are in them, but just so that you can recognize them. So yeah, the spirituality can also be used in order to bypass everything, right? To just be in the positive thoughts, only positive, right? The negative is completely disregarded and seen as something bad and something that shouldn't be seen, right? It cuts you off from your whole being, because your being has the positive and the negative within you. So it's not the point to cut any of these principles, it's to balance them, to integrate them. So yeah, basically the dark feminine refuses to see any kind of responsibility in the current circumstances that are around you, right? And also avoids shadows, avoids the darkness. Like I said, the positive side of feminine energy is that it can see beauty in everything. And on the other hand, when it's dark and fallen, it loses the ability to see the beauty. It just disappears. Another thing that happens when there is too much of this fallen feminine energy, also like a small disclaimer before I go into this, these things might, because when we listen to something, we tend to then start to search within ourselves. We start to analyze. It doesn't have the aim now to trigger you or to, make you feel reactive. That's why I say, like, be an observer, listen to this, have an open heart, an open mind, and then filter everything, right? It is not here to trigger you or to, because we all have this. We all experience parts of darker sides and the lighter sides of both of these energies. Okay, so the dark side of feminine is that it gets completely lost in emotions. The emotions just take fully over the whole being, right? It's like not too much emotions. Emotions are always there, but it's just that there is nothing to balance them, which is your mind. The mind and the willpower are there basically to balance the emotions, right? There is no intervention of the mind that can analyze and see exactly where this emotion comes from. So yeah, this is what, of course, emotions are very much related to women. That's why you see also within man circles that, like, talking about emotions is not something so good. This is another different side of masculine energy that we will also talk about. But that, like I said, the problem with the fallen feminine or disbalanced feminine energy is there are a lot of emotions that are not understood. They just take over your whole being, and you purely act out of emotions. You're not acting out of balance and center point, which considers then also having the masculine principle within you, which is the mind and the will. But basically, you're just ran by the emotions. You're just like going up and down all the time. This is one of the common characteristics of the fallen feminine. What the balanced feminine energy does is that basically it can have these, let's say, emotions or intuition. Even intuition is also feminine, a feminine characteristic. Very intuitive people have very good integrated feminine energy within themselves. What a balanced feminine energy would do is it will get this kind of emotion or intuition, and then it will apply, it will use the mind in order to make a certain action out of it. So it doesn't just act upon pure emotion or on only pure intuition, right? But it also uses the other aspects, the masculine aspects, to become more like balanced and then act out of that balanced point, right? What also people who have like a higher version of feminine energy do, they do understand these spiritual concepts very well. they have to they basically have also a deep understanding for their own feelings and emotions. What also balanced feminine does is it wants to bring the beauty, the inspiration, the intuition into the material world, right? This is what a very balanced and integrated feminine energy does. It takes a concept, a spiritual concept, or inspiration to do something nice, beautiful, useful, whatever, and then acts upon it and brings it into the material world. This is what a balanced energy does. When it comes to another aspect, also how we can see the feminine energy in our society is also within political systems, right? We have this political left and the political right, right? Political left would be the expression of the feminine impulse. And it has, of course, its dark and light sides. The dark side is definitely would be, you know, like the dark sides of communism, right? Using the community, using the peace and love and whatnot, these concepts to basically manipulate people. This is also the archetype of the dark mother. Another archetype that when it's personified on material plane, what it does is basically it uses the ideas of community and love to basically manipulate to get what it wants, to control things. So it has very, very, dark intention within it. It's not there in order to, really spread love and freedom for everyone. It's there basically for its own desires, to control and to manipulate. So this is like when you would have, a mother who says, if you do this and that, then I will be happy, then you will get my love, right? It puts condition on love and then connection, right? So this is this dark aspect of it, so to say. And you also see this on the political level, like in this in communism as a very far left. The dark side of it is basically that you use the concept of community in order to control people. Because community can only be truly powerful if it's really a group of highly conscious people, highly conscious individuals that can still keep their individuality. They can be who they are within the community. Right now, when you have some kind of forms of communities, it is always like that you have to give some part of yourself out. It is like you cannot be fully your own individuality and be part of a group. That's very rare. We are going, when we talk about evolution, I talked about it in the last lecture, we are going into the direction of building conscious communities. We didn't have this before. We had tribes, which is basically a community of there was no consciousness, really, no individuality. It was basically a hive mind at the beginning when we had matriarchy, for example. That's why at the end matriarchy was falling, because there were certain feminine leaders who would use their position to control people, basically. That's why it fell down at the end and turned into later on patriarchy. I said, about the dark mother and the relationship with the child. You can also, also want to give you an example of like a lower feminine when it comes to male and female relationships. So what tends to happen sometimes with women who are, or men, it doesn't matter, who have this lower version of feminine energy or the darker version, it's that they cannot see this person in its in objective way or like in a real way. They usually tend to fantasize and to add certain traits around this person when they meet them. We all do this, right? When we meet someone, we tend to think about them in a very abstract way. We don't really know who this person is. But the thing is, like, when the time goes by, you have the chance to meet this person, to see how he or she behaves in a daily life, and then you can see more objective picture of them. But if for some reason the time passes by, we talk about years, and you still you see that something is off, and you're not really feeling yourself within this relationship, and you constantly justify, or you fantasize in a way of adding certain traits to this person which they don't actually have, then what happens is that people stay in a very, very long relationships which are very dysfunctional, because they are afraid to acknowledge the reality. In a way, you also run away, right, from the reality, because sometimes it's very painful, and sometimes it's very painful to set the boundary, right? This is also a thing with the lack of feminine, a true feminine, high feminine energy, is that there are no boundaries, right? There is no sense of individuality, boundary. This is me, and you openly communicate it to other person. So that's the problem. Sometimes with this fallen version of feminine energy, it doesn't have the capacity for reality. You just ran into imaginary pictures of some person. Or sometimes some people would just get into certain relationships in order to get this kind of satisfaction, to get attention. You're not really interested to really learn about this person, to get to know, to build something together. You just want to be satisfied on the lower level, and get your attention, dopamine kick, and then run away, right? So this is also very superficial. It doesn't go deep. This is also a form of lower version of the feminine energy. Yeah. So this would be something about the feminine energy, like the higher and the lower version of it, the dark side and the light side of it. Now we will go to the Mars, the male the masculine principle. What is beautiful about masculine energy is that masculine energy clarifies the feminine energy. It brings more clarity. This is the concept of the mind, right? The mind and the emotions. Also, the same thing, the same coin, but just the different sides of coins, right? You have the mind that understands, that analyzes, right? And you have the emotions that are very, they are vast, they're unpredictable, right? That's also feminine energy. It's very unpredictable, which has its own beauty. That's why it's so creative, because creativity you cannot plan or, put it in a box. It just comes as it is. And if it's balanced, the masculine energy will support that and basically clarify it, understand it, and put it into a material world. So the bright side of the masculine energy, it brings clarity. It takes like emotion or like spiritual information or intuition, the other name for this, and it clarifies it and understands it and materializes. It acts upon it. So the idea of the masculine energy is that the material world should be the closest and the most precise expression of the spirit world, right? As above, so below. So the non-physical world basically is a blueprint for what happens here on the earth, what materializes. And this is basically this concept of as above, so below. So the masculine energy wants to build and create and materialize as precise as it is in the non-physical blueprint, right? The Mars is like, or the masculine energy would be, you have a certain concept that always comes from the energy, the feminine energy, which says, for example, it is good to be kind, or the concept of beauty. And then what Mars will do, it will make something concrete out of it, right? It shows you how to be kind, or it shows you what love means on the material plane. How does it look like, right? how does it actually look like? Something that is very, vast and almost abstract, it clarifies it, it brings it into very concrete material form. This is the beauty of masculine energy. And masculine energy is also related to justice, to order, to a grounded expression of spirituality, right? It uses the spiritual energy or the emotions in order to understand itself. This is what masculine energy, when it's balanced, it does, right? It wants to bring, in a way, this balance to this emotional, spiritual energy, in a way, because it wants to understand it. Also, the concept of protection of the innocent. This is basically what is meant by the warrior archetype. It is there to bring justice and to protect the innocent. It is not there on the other side, on the darker side. You have the archetype of warrior that goes to conquer countries and worlds just for the sake of power, to express the power and domination over others. That's the fallen aspect of masculine energy, which is very much present, as you can see, in our collective. So also courage, also passion and trust in spirit, in God. This is something like masculine energy is actually very passionate about spirit and the God, because it wants to really bring it on the material plane. What else? Yeah, the masculine energy gives structure, gives order, gives routines, the repetition, it turns ideas into action. It brings basically this high energy, that's feminine energy, let's say this spiritual energy, inspiration, ideas, concepts, right? It brings them on earth, it grounds them really well. However, it has also dark side, right? The dark side of the masculine energy would be basically cutting off everything that has to do with spirit, with spiritual stuff, with everything that is non-physical. Because it has such a downward pulling, so to say, downward force that wants to bring things on earth, it is very much focused on the material. So in a very lower version of masculine energy, you have, for example, the concept of the so-called dogmatic materialism, which is like only what is physical is truth. Only what we see on earth here as a physical, the things that I can touch, that I can see, that I can smell, only that exists. Only that, like nothing above material exists. So it's very, very disbalanced because it cuts itself from creativity, inspiration, beauty. When you have too much of the darker masculine energy, you don't have beauty. You can, like, for example, if you would see military camps, there's no beauty in it, right? It has order, it has structure, but it doesn't have beauty. And also, like, I give the example of like darker masculine, which basically the warrior archetype, the darker warrior, is the one who wants to invade, who wants to conquer for the sake of power, right? It has a huge focus on the individual, not on the community, right? So it's the entire opposite. This is also the political right, okay? So we have this obsession about the needs of an individual. This is why you have hierarchies, right? These hierarchical structures when the person of the above gets the vast majority and the people underneath get only crumbles, right? It is not focused at everybody, that it includes everyone, the community, right? It basically, it's very focused on these low egotistical individual needs, obsessed with power, right? Obsessed with getting material things. Only when it gains material things it can feel satisfied, but ultimately it cannot feel satisfied because it's cut off the emotions. Another thing that also dark masculine does, it doesn't acknowledge emotions. Emotions should be cut off, right? Only mind. There's only mind. So there is this glorification of the intellect, of the mind. This is also the dark side of the science, if I'm fully open to talk about it. The dark side of science is not acknowledging at all something that is non-physical. It is okay to, be aware of be aware of the material things, laws, and how we can, examine them, test them out, see what is the tiniest particle in it, right? But without, cutting off ourselves from the whole entire side, which is non-physical, which belongs to spirit, spiritual world, non-physical dimensions, metaphysics, whatever. You will often hear in scientific circles where metaphysics is ridiculed, spirituality is ridiculed, it's seen as something not serious, not truth. It's not truth, it doesn't exist because I cannot see it. I cannot exactly show you that spirit exists. I cannot make a physical proof out of it, right? I cannot measure it exactly to see how big is the spirit. So that's the dark side of the masculine energy. Also the belief that the logic and mind are everything. Like emotions are the lowest thing. Like emotions we should disregard. They are only confusing us. We don't actually understand them. That's the issue with the dark masculine. It doesn't acknowledge and understand emotions and energy as a part of the whole life of nature. Also, the dark masculine has the desire to control everything. These people usually, we call them, control freaks. It wants to have a control over everything because it cannot relax or trust into something higher than him or herself. That's the issue. It cannot relax. It's always tensed and always wants to take too much responsibility. You also will see that people who take too much responsibility for everything and everyone, right? On the different side, on the other side of the spectrum, you have feminine energy who doesn't take at all responsibility in the darker version, right? So these are all like the extremes. Also, you will have this social contracts or like social manipulation through like a story that we invade others because we want to protect them. The protection, the defense, and order is, there as a concept to manipulate, basically, to gain something, just for the individual. You have this like the darkest example in the whole humanity was the Nazi regime, right? Where there was all kinds of orders and disciplines and regimes, but there wasn't beauty, there wasn't love, there wasn't community. So, and of course, the lowest masculine uses war to achieve the order in society. Right? It doesn't know how to use spiritual concepts or metaphysical concept or heart energy, just using the heart to bring the order. No, it only brings the lowest versions. It uses the lowest tools in order to achieve the order. Yeah, so like I said, usually in the very low version of masculine energy doesn't acknowledge at all like the concept of God or the non-physical, right? Everything that is non-physical doesn't exist. What also this fallen masculine energy does, it doesn't like the change. It doesn't like the change at all. It just wants to keep everything as it is. It's actually afraid of change. I mentioned that the feminine energy is all about the change, bringing the new energy, the inspiration, and all of that. Well, you don't have this with the dark masculine, right? It just wants to keep everything as it is in a strict order and repetitive, that everything repeats all the time the same, nothing new. So that's the darker masculine. what I also wanted to mention is, because now we are at the end of this lecture almost, to touch upon this topic about where are we now currently as humanity, what's happening right now. So I talked about the beginning of our evolution, which is related to matriarchy, right? The great impulse of feminine energy that came from the cosmos, right? From the unified field, from the singular point after the Big Bang. So we had first this feminine impulse, which had its high and then it has its low. This is the natural pattern in the universe. It's like a wave all the time going up and down, right? So it had first this like feminine impulse, which had its high versions of it, the higher levels of matriarchy, which were, beautiful in their own way. And then it came to the darker version of it, where we talked about it, like it was like basically using the concepts of community for control, like love, peace, community for the controlling, basically, and gaining power over that. So that was one period of time. Then slowly the patriarchy came, where again it was first the higher version of patriarchy and then the lower version of patriarchy, where we are currently also. You can see, with one big difference, and that is that we are slowly entering the phase of our evolution where it is required of us to integrate both, right? So that we are not going to have this one side of coin, right? The high feminine without masculine and other way around, but more of a unified, more of integrated and balanced feminine and masculine energies. So this is why I mentioned this concept of conscious communities, which I think it is where the humanity is going to, or in the future, so to say, what's coming up and what are we currently, preparing ourselves, right? This is why this whole topic of integration and healing and whatnot, depending on in which sector you are. If you are in spiritual circles, you may also call it ascension. If you are in psychological circles, you will call integration and healing and all of that. So basically, we have this impulse for integration, to balance both principles. And in our history, there was one, I mentioned you that there once in a while comes a personification of a certain impulse in the person, in the human. And the example of, or the human incarnation, human example of balanced feminine and masculine energy would be Jesus Christ, for example. So when I talk about him, I'm not talking about him in a religious dogmatic way, okay? This is just from more like metaphysical, objective point, so to say, because he was a master, master teacher, who embodied, who personified a balanced feminine energy, feminine and masculine energy, and gave us the example what we can achieve if we act out of this centered point, right, of integrated point within us. So this is why Christianity had such an influence, right? Of course, it got twisted, and there are also a lot of dark aspects of it. But the basic message that was spread at the beginning, and what Jesus also tried to spread as much as possible, is that, to live in the center point, basically living from your heart, where you have the balancing masculine and feminine energies. So this is where we are now going toward, right? We want to balance this out. We want to recognize what the whole point of this lecture and my message also is, that that we start to observe and see within us, where are we, in which situations we tend to go more into the fallen feminine or into the fallen masculine energies, or when we are experiencing the higher versions of them, right? Just to recognize it and to act and make basically actions in the world as much as possible out of this center point, right? This is why we do healing and integration and shadow work and understanding ourselves. It's in order to bring these energies in a dynamic balance, right? It is never going to be 50-50, and it's never static, you know, that you achieve this point and it's just, you know, it's all the time like that. We will always fall out of it. But the point is that we always try to come back to this centered point. So this is the basic message, that you know, look at the world and see where you can recognize the patterns of feminine and masculine energy, and also within you and in your life, you know, so that when you recognize some of these qualities that I tried to communicate to you, that you can balance them and enter into the lighter version of them, right, and act out of them. So I think with that I will conclude, and thank you so much for your attention. If you have any questions, feel free to write. I will leave my Instagram account and my mail address underneath, so you can always write me if you want to. And yeah, I will see you very soon in another lecture. Bye!